A simple woman gave a soldier a ride in the rain. Then she heard a knock that changed her life. It was pouring rain, the kind that soaked through denim and made headlights blur like tears. Grace Bennett didn't plan to stop. She didn't know his name, didn't ask what had happened. She just saw a man limping, hunched beneath the weight of a drenched pack, walking alone down a winding two-lane road outside Maple Hollow. She could have kept driving. Most would have, but something inside her wouldn't let go of the sight. A soldier's silhouette swallowed by stormlight. Her daughter's voice echoed in her memory. "Why do people walk alone, Mama?" And Grace heard her own heart answer, "Because sometimes no one stops." That night, she did. She offered him tea, a blanket, a couch. She didn't ask for his story. She just gave him a place to rest. By morning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, just a folded towel and a Purple Heart medal left beside the sink. Weeks passed, bills mounted, foreclosure papers arrived. The world grew quiet and heavy again until there was a knock. And standing at the door wasn't the bank, wasn't pity. It was him. But this time he wasn't alone. And what he carried would rewrite everything she thought she knew about kindness, debt, and what it means to be seen. Before we dive in, ask yourself, have you ever done something kind and never looked back? What if one day it came back looking for you? Because for Grace Bennett, it did. And nothing was ever the same again. A simple woman helped a soldier in the rain. Then she heard a knock that changed her life. It was pouring rain, the kind that soaked through denim and made headlights blur like tears. Grace Bennett didn't plan to stop. She didn't know his name, didn't ask what had happened, just saw a man limping, hunched beneath the weight of a drenched pack, walking alone down a winding two-lane road outside Maple Hollow. She could have kept driving, most people would have, but something inside her wouldn't let go of the sight, a soldier's silhouette swallowed by stormlight. Her daughter's voice echoed in her memory. "Why do people walk alone, Mama?" And Grace heard her own heart whisper back, "Because sometimes no one stops." No. That night, she did. She offered him tea, a blanket, a couch. She didn't ask for his story. She just gave him a place to rest. By morning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, just a folded towel and a Purple Heart medal left beside the sink. Weeks passed. Bills mounted. Foreclosure papers arrived. The world grew quiet and heavy again. Until there was a knock. And standing at the door wasn't the bank, wasn't pity. It was him. But this time, he wasn't alone. And what he carried would rewrite everything Grace thought she knew about kindness, debt, and what it means to be seen. Before we go further, ask yourself, have you ever done something kind and never looked back? What if one day it came back looking for you? Because for Grace Bennett, it did. And nothing was ever the same again. The rain had been falling for hours, soaking the narrow back roads outside Maple Hollow in cold, silver sheets. Grace Bennett gripped the steering wheel of her old teal pickup, her eyes squinting through the blurry windshield as the wipers struggled to keep up. It was nearly 8 o'clock p.m., and she should have been home already. Her daughter, Mia, would be waiting, with her favorite stuffed bear and a warm mug of milk. But the bakery van had broken down again. Grace had stayed late to help her boss, Mr. Tarpet, close up before the storm worsened. She never complained. Not when the heater wheezed in their old trailer, not when the lights flickered during dinner, and not even when the bills arrived thicker than her paycheck. Grace didn't live for more. She lived for enough. And that night, enough looked like a warm blanket, a working truck, and a road that led home. Until she saw him, a figure walking slowly on the shoulder, head bowed, soaked clothes clinging to his body like a second skin. He limped badly, leaning to one side with each step. His backpack sagged heavily behind him. Grace's breath caught in her throat as she passed. A part of her wanted to keep driving, and the voice in her head, the one formed by years of warnings, told her not to stop. You don't pick up strangers in the dark, Grace, especially not alone. Especially not now. But another voice, softer, older, rose up inside her. Her father's voice, spoken decades ago in weather just like this. If nobody else stops, maybe it's because you're supposed to. She eased her foot onto the brake. The man didn't look up. Maybe he didn't expect help. Maybe he thought she was stopping for herself. But when she lowered her window and leaned over the bench seat, her voice barely louder than the rain, he finally turned. "Hey," she called gently. "You all right out here?" He paused. The hood of his jacket slipped back slightly, revealing a face shadowed by fatigue and rain. A scar, long and jagged, ran from his temple down his jawline, something burned into him by fire, not time. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said. His voice was low, rough, but controlled. "I didn't say you were," Grace replied. For a long moment they held eye contact. Stranger and stranger, caught in the downpour. Then she reached across the seat and pushed the door open. "I'm heading past the old base road. I can drop you off at the gate." He hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Thanks." As he climbed into the truck, the cab filled with the scent of wet canvas and something faintly metallic. He winced as he sat, clearly favoring his right side. His jacket was torn in places, stained. Grace noticed the old army insignia on his sleeve, half faded. "You in the service?" she asked gently, turning back onto the slick road. "Was just discharged." She glanced over. "Honorable?" A flicker of a smile crossed his lips. "Is there any other kind?" They drove in silence after that. No music, no small talk, just the rhythm of rain against the roof and the faint hum of the struggling heater. At each red light she caught more details. His hair was cropped tight, military style. The scar continued past his collarbone, disappearing beneath his shirt. He looked young and old all at once. "You from around here?" she asked eventually. "No, just passing through, trying to get to Wilton." "That's over 20 miles, she said, surprised. "On foot?" He shrugged. Didn't have many options. Grace tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The ache in his words settled in her chest. "What about the VA?" she asked quietly. He let out a humorless laugh. "They helped me out the door." Up ahead, the rusted sign for the old military turnoff came into view. Grace slowed the truck, her eyes scanning the darkness. "I can let you off here," she said. But he didn't move. "I don't have ID," he said quietly. "Lost my wallet when I got discharged. They said my documents would come in the mail." "You mean they let you out with no ID, no transport?" "I didn't say it was a good system." She pulled to the side of the road and sat there, her fingers hovering above the steering wheel. She didn't plan to speak again, but the words came before she could second-guess them. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" He met her eyes, the same guarded look she had seen in customers who didn't know how to ask for help. "I'll find somewhere." "That's not what I asked." 10 minutes later, he was sitting at her kitchen table, dripping onto a folded towel. She had handed him a mug of tea and shown him where the coffee would be in the morning. Her daughter Mia peeked out from the hallway once, clutching her stuffed bear, but Grace gently motioned her back to bed. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. But something in that scarred soldier's silence told her this man had carried more than any stranger should ever have to. And that night, she had a couch. That was all he needed. And it was all she had to give. The next morning he was gone. No creaking floorboards, no door closing, just the faint smell of coffee she hadn't brewed and the folded towel left precisely where he had sat. But there was something else, something that made her freeze mid-step in the kitchen. A small heavy object placed beside the sink. A purple heart. It was worn. The ribbon slightly frayed at the edge, but unmistakable. Grace stared at it for a long time. One hand rested on the counter, the other pressed gently against her chest, as if she needed to steady her own heartbeat. She didn't pick it up, not right away. It felt too sacred for hands that had done nothing to earn it. Eventually, she wrapped it in a dishcloth and placed it inside the drawer, next to a few stray keys, a rubber band ball, and Mia's old drawing of their trailer taped to a rainbow. She told no one, not Nora, her best friend, who definitely would have said something like, "You let a stranger sleep on your couch?" Not her mother, who would have asked too many questions. None of them kind. Not even Mia, who would have assumed the man was one of the tired angels she believed wandered the world. Grace didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't logic. It wasn't charity. It was something else, like she had been waiting for something without knowing what. And the night she saw Logan in the rain, it found her first. 12 days passed. The towel remained folded neatly. The Purple Heart now shared a drawer with late bills and expired coupons. The couch sat empty again, except for the space where the quiet used to be. And then came the letter. She found it tucked awkwardly in her mailbox, half damp from the morning drizzle. No return address, no stamp. Just her name on the front. Inside, a single sentence, scrawled in blocky, uneven handwriting. You reminded me I still mattered. I'll find a way to repay that. Signed only with initials, LW. That was it. No full name, no explanation, just those few words, hurried and direct. Grace stood by the kitchen sink, reading the sentence over and over until the letters blurred. Then she folded the note and slid it gently into the same drawer as the medal. She closed it softly, like laying a flower at a grave. But while Logan had disappeared, real life had not, and real life was not kind. The foreclosure notice arrived 4 days later. A thick envelope from Maple Hollow Credit Union, with her name printed in bold, impersonal font. She didn't need to open it. She already knew what it said. 30 days. That's how long she had before the home her father built. Warped floors, patched roof. The little garden she and Mia had dug together with plastic shovels would be listed, auctioned, lost. She tried everything. Worked double shifts at the bakery, sold the last of her mother's jewelry, took in odd cake orders, which she decorated by flashlight at midnight while Mia slept. She even canceled the internet, twice, before realizing Mia needed it for school. But no matter how much Grace gave, kindness didn't pay mortgages. At work, she still smiled, still poured coffee for the same regulars, still packed takeout pies into cracked foam boxes, still wiped down booths long after closing, and no one noticed. Because Grace Bennett had always been the same, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who never asked for help. But alone in her small kitchen with a letter in the drawer and 30 days on the clock, she wasn't strong. She wasn't brave. She was scared. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe giving kindness without expectation meant no one would think to return it. Until Nora noticed. It was a Tuesday. Grace had wiped down the same counter 3 times in 10 minutes, her motions distracted and aimless. Nora finally set her mop aside and crossed her arms with that look, half concern, half challenge. "Okay," she said. "What's going on?" Grace blinked. "Nothing. You forgot it was my snack day. You gave Officer Jim his coffee without cinnamon. You haven't even teased me about my bad date from last week. Spill." Grace hesitated. Then she did. Not everything, but enough. About Logan. The night in the rain, the Purple Heart, the folded towel, the letter in the drawer, the house, the slow, gnawing countdown. And Nora didn't gasp, didn't lecture. She just leaned on the counter, nodded once, and said, "Well, that sucks." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Grace in weeks. She let out a small, exhausted laugh, but it was real. "Yeah," she whispered, "it really does." The next morning, after dropping Mia off at school, Grace took the long way home. Her truck rumbled past familiar places, the rusted grain silo, the gas station with the flickering sign, the old VFW hall near the edge of town. A hand-painted banner hung from the railing. Veteran Support Breakfast. This Saturday. All welcome. She almost drove past. She had nothing to give, nothing left to spare. But then she thought of Logan's scarred hands wrapped around the mug of tea. The soaked towel still folded neatly on the couch. The letter in her drawer. The silence of someone who didn't ask for help but desperately needed it. Grace eased her foot off the gas. Saturday came, gray and chilly. She rose early and baked, not because she had to, not because there was enough flour, but because it was the one thing she could still do well. She wrapped her honey oat loaves in cloth and placed them in an old basket. The VFW hall was modest, just folding tables, dented chairs, and the lingering smell of burnt coffee. A few veterans in worn denim and faded caps lingered near the back. Grace didn't know anyone, but she stayed. She set the bread on the table, poured coffee, smiled when someone met her eyes. She didn't talk much, just moved quietly from table to table, wiping crumbs, refilling mugs, offering a kind of presence that needed no explanation. She didn't expect to be noticed, but someone did. Near the back of the hall sat a man in his early 30s, lean, sharp-eyed, his posture unmistakably military. As Grace reached to collect his plate, he looked up. "You're Grace Bennett, right?" She froze. "Yes," she said cautiously. He stood, wiping his hands on a napkin. "I think you know someone I served with." Grace's heart skipped. "Logan?" The man nodded, then reached into his jacket and unfolded a photograph. 6 men in desert fatigues clustered in front of a rusted vehicle. One of them, half his face bandaged, grinning despite the crutch under his arm, was Logan. "He sent this a few weeks ago," the man said. "Said he met someone in Pennsylvania. Said she reminded him of who he used to be." Grace stared at the photo. Logan looked so different, smiling, surrounded. "I didn't know he had anyone left," she said softly. The man shrugged. "Logan doesn't talk much. Not since the fire, but when he does, he means it." He handed her the photo. "Thank you for seeing him. Not many do." That night, Grace pinned the photo above her kitchen sink. It wasn't framed. It didn't need to be. It just belonged. She looked at it every time she washed dishes, and something inside her began to shift. A quiet realization that her small, invisible, tired, ordinary life had somehow brushed against something much bigger. 3 weeks passed, and then came the call from Maple Hollow Credit Union. Grace had tried everything. Delayed payments, polite calls to the manager, even begged for a restructure. But the voice on the other end, though courteous, was firm. "Unless something changes dramatically, Ms. Bennett," the woman said, "there's not much more we can do." Grace hung up the phone and sat at the table, head in her hands. Mia played quietly in the next room, unaware that her unicorn-covered bedroom might vanish in just 30 days. That night, after dinner, Grace stood by the window, watching the porch light flicker in the drizzle. The Purple Heart still lay in the drawer. The letter, the photo. She didn't know what she was waiting for. A miracle? A restart? What she got was a knock. It came at 7:03 p.m. Grace wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door. And there he was, Logan Wells. He stood on her porch, upright, steady, dressed in full military uniform. Clean-shaven, purposeful. Behind him, 2 black SUVs idled quietly at the curb. Flanking him were 2 other men, one wearing Master Sergeant stripes, the other a captain's insignia. "Evening, Grace," Logan said, his voice softer, clearer than she remembered. Her throat tightened. "Logan?" He nodded once, then held out an envelope. It wasn't thick, but it felt heavy. "This is long overdue," he said, "but it's only the beginning." Grace didn't move at first. She stood in the doorway, one hand still clutching the dish towel, eyes flicking between the envelope, Logan's hand, and the 2 uniformed men beside him. The porch light glowed warm over Logan's scarred face, casting long shadows across the steps. There was no rain this time, no limp, no hoodie soaked to the bone, just presence, purpose. "What is this?" she whispered. Logan stepped forward carefully, no longer hunched by pain. "It's everything you never asked for, but everything you deserve." Then he turned slightly. "Captain?" The taller of the 2 men stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Captain Stephen Marks, United States Army. We're here on behalf of the Office of Veteran Community Engagement and the 5th Special Recon Unit." Grace blinked. I don't understand." "We'd like to come in," the captain said gently, "if now's a good time." Behind her, Mia peeked around the hallway corner, barefoot, hugging her stuffed bear. Grace turned quickly. "Sweetheart, it's okay, just some visitors." Captain Marks crouched down with a smile. "Hi there, I'm Stephen. Are you Mia?" Mia nodded shyly. "We're real soldiers," Logan added softly, dropping to one knee beside her. "But we're not here on a mission." "Then why are you here?" Mia asked quietly. Logan looked up at Grace. "Because when no one else did, your mom saw someone worth saving." They sat around the small kitchen table, Grace, Logan, the captain, the master sergeant, whose name was Alvarez. Mia, after a little coaxing and a promise of dessert, returned to her room. The envelope lay unopened in front of Grace. Logan spoke first. "The night you picked me up," Logan began, hands folded tightly in his lap, "I was in a bad place. Worse than I let on." He glanced down before continuing. "I'd just been discharged from a rehab unit in Harrisburg, not because I was ready, because they were full, budget cuts." Grace opened her mouth slightly, but the words wouldn't come. "I lost my wallet in the fire. Had no ID, no money, no place to stay. I was walking to Wilton because I thought an old buddy might still live there. I didn't even know if he did." He hesitated, his voice growing quieter. "There was a bottle in my bag, my last one, unopened. I'd planned to find a quiet spot and disappear." Grace's eyes welled, the sting sharp behind her lids. "Logan." "But then you stopped," he said, his voice catching. "You didn't ask me what I'd done." You didn't flinch at the scars. You didn't treat me like a stray dog or a threat. You gave me tea, a towel, silence. You treated me like a human being. He turned to Captain Marks. I wrote my unit that night. Told them something happened I couldn't explain. Something I hadn't felt since before deployment. Captain Marks opened a black folder and slid a document across the table. Grace stared. Her name, Grace Bennett, was printed in elegant script at the top, beneath the seal of the United States Army. It was a certificate of community honor, recognizing her for exceptional compassion, courage, and quiet service to a wounded veteran. Ms. Grace Bennett is hereby recognized as an honorary civilian contributor to veteran resilience and recovery initiatives, Captain Marks read aloud, with all corresponding privileges and acknowledgments. Grace blinked hard, tears threatening to fall. That's from the Secretary of the Army, Captain Marks added gently. Then Master Sergeant Alvarez placed a second document beside the first. This one simpler, plainer, but far more powerful. This one, he said, Logan insisted on. Grace read the first line and felt the air leave her lungs. This letter confirms full acquisition and forgiveness of mortgage debt associated with the property at 178 Orchard Lane, Maple Hollow, Pennsylvania. Her home, her father's home. Saved. Her eyes filled, her voice cracked. Why would you do this? Logan met her gaze. Because what you did wasn't just for me. You reminded me, and the people I serve with, that quiet kindness still exists, and that it matters. Grace pressed her hands to her face, shoulders trembling. Shall I continue with the next portion? Approx. Minutes 2300, 2600. They didn't stay long. Just enough to answer her questions, to promise follow-up support, and to offer the kind of presence that didn't crowd, but reassured. Before they left, Logan reached into his uniform pocket and placed a small velvet box in Grace's hand. She opened it slowly. Inside was a heavy silver coin, cool to the touch, engraved with a military emblem on one side. On the other, a single line. She didn't ask, she just acted. It's a challenge coin, Logan explained, usually for valor in combat, but sometimes we give them to civilians, when they remind us why we serve. Grace held it close, unable to speak. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the kind of gratitude that's too deep for words. That night, after Mia went to bed, Grace sat by the window, her fingers running over the smooth edge of the coin. The certificate hung quietly above the mantel. The original letter from Logan lay folded beside the sink, and in the drawer beneath it all, the Purple Heart still rested, wrapped in the same old dishcloth. The house was safe now. But what she had given that night on the road hadn't been charity. It had been dignity. And now it had come back, multiplied. For a while, everything felt still. Grace moved through her days with a kind of quiet calm, like someone walking through freshly fallen snow, carefully, reverently, not wanting to disturb the peace that had finally arrived. She slept a full night for the first time in months. But peace has a way of being temporary, especially in places where old paperwork gathers dust in dark corners. It started with a voicemail. Hey Grace, this is Greg from County Services. Sorry to bother you, but something's come up with your property records. You might want to swing by when you get a chance. She felt it instantly, that twisting knot in her stomach, the one she hadn't missed. The county office was dim, filled with filing cabinets and the scent of stale coffee. Greg, the same clerk who had handled her tax filings for years, looked sheepish as he rifled through a manila folder. I know the Army paperwork cleared your mortgage, he said. But when we scanned the deed again, something came up. Grace leaned in slowly, bracing herself. There's an old lien attached to the land, Greg continued. Dated back more than 20 years. Looks like your father took out a private loan after your mother passed. It was never formally discharged. Greg adjusted his glasses and sighed. That debt. It got sold. Probably more than once. Now some third-party agency has filed a legal claim. Grace's voice barely found its way out. What does that mean? He winced. Technically, they now own the acreage behind your home. Everything past the main structure, the garden, the shed, the coop. Anything not directly tied to the original mortgage. Grace felt the air drain from the room. But that's our backyard, she whispered. That's where Mia planted her first sunflower. That's where I... She stopped herself. I know, Greg said gently. But they filed legally. If we don't contest it fast, they could fence it off, even sell it. He hesitated before adding, And I looked into the agency. They've done this before. A faceless corporation digging up old debts, preying on vulnerable families, hoping no one has the strength or knowledge to fight back. Grace left the building in silence. She sat in her truck for nearly 10 minutes, unmoving, her hands locked around the steering wheel. Then she pulled out her phone. The message she typed was simple. "Hi, Logan. I know you've already done more than I could ever ask, but something's come up." She hit send. Then, with a quiet whisper into the empty cab, she said, "Please let kindness keep going." Logan didn't ask for details. He just called the next morning. His voice was calm, measured, the same as it had been the night she first heard it through the rain. He listened, carefully, quietly, without interrupting. Then, after a pause, he said only 4 words. "I'll take care of it." 3 days later, a man in a charcoal suit walked into the county records office. He carried a leather briefcase, a federal ID, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who wasn't used to being told no. He didn't threaten. He didn't argue. He simply handed Greg a sealed packet of documents, stamped with a federal seal and signed by a judge from the Eastern District. The lien was invalid. The loan had been reactivated through fraudulent means. The agency behind it? A shell company. One already under federal investigation. It was over. This time, for real. When Grace got the call, she didn't answer right away. She just stared at the screen as it rang. Then, slowly, she climbed into her truck, drove to the edge of town, and sat at the top of the old hill, where her father had once taught her how to roll-start a stalled engine. There, under a sky just beginning to bloom with the soft colors of dusk, she cried. Quietly. Messily. No one was watching. And that was the point. Later that evening, she called Logan. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "You already did," he replied. "You just don't know it yet." The next day, she found another envelope in her mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a single sentence written in slanted, deliberate script. "What you grow in quiet places will one day feed someone you'll never meet." And beneath it, one word. Seer. Latin, she would later learn, for always. Grace folded the note and placed it beside the Purple Heart, the challenge coin, and Logan's original letter. A small wooden box now held them all, not as trophies, but as reminders. That weekend, she stood barefoot in her backyard, the late spring sun warming the soil. It was hers now, all of it. And the roots she once feared would be ripped away had grown deeper, stronger, steadier. Because in the end, the knock on her door hadn't just brought help, it had brought justice. And no corporation, no false debt, no buried paper trail would take that from her again. Spring came quietly to Maple Hollow. The lilacs at the edge of her yard bloomed once more, their scent drifting through the open kitchen windows as bees hovered over the vegetable beds she thought she'd never see again. The coop behind the shed clucked with new life. Every morning, Mia ran barefoot through dew-covered grass to check for eggs, her laughter echoing across the field. The land was truly hers now, not just the house, but the earth beneath it. The trees her father had planted. The garden she'd saved with every late-night worry and whispered prayer. But something else had changed, too. Grace moved through the world differently now. Not louder, not prouder, but steadier. She no longer avoided eye contact at the grocery store. She looked people in the eye and smiled, not because of the recognition, but because she had survived. And because somewhere in the quiet of her thoughts, she still heard Logan's words. What you did reminded us why we serve. Grace hadn't asked to be seen, but now people did. The first real change came in the form of a letter from the Veteran Resilience Network of Eastern Pennsylvania. It arrived in a plain white envelope with a formal seal and a handwritten postscript at the bottom. From Logan, it read, "Just show up. That's all you've ever needed to do." The letter asked if she would consider serving as a community advisor, not because she had military experience, not because she had a degree, but because she had lived it. Quiet compassion, grounded strength, the kind of perspective that couldn't be taught. At first, Grace hesitated. She wasn't a speaker. She didn't know the terminology. She wasn't an expert in trauma or policy or systems. But then she remembered Logan, soaking wet, silent, sitting in her truck with a pain he didn't know how to name, and how all she did was not look away. Maybe that was enough. She said yes. The first few meetings were held in a converted shipping container outside Wilton. A crooked hand-painted sign read, "Support Circle, Veterans and Civilians Welcome." Inside were mismatched chairs, a coffee pot that brewed more rust than roast, and a silence that felt heavy at first. But Grace sat with it. She listened. Spoke when she had something real to say. Told stories about her dad, a Vietnam vet who flinched every 4th of July. About raising Mia with just enough to get by. About what it meant to open your door to someone when you barely had anything to give. And slowly word spread. Veterans who had never shown up before began to trickle in. Some out of curiosity. Some because they'd heard about her. Not from her, but from each other. One afternoon in late April, an older man named Harvey sat beside her in the parking lot after a session. His knuckles were swollen, his skin sun-damaged and tight. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and said, "You know, I used to think civvies didn't get it." Grace glanced at him. "Some probably don't," Harvey nodded. "But you didn't need to get it. You just showed up." He flicked the ash. "We need more people like that." She didn't reply, just sat with him, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Back in Maple Hollow, life didn't turn dramatic. It turned deeper. Nora still dropped by every Friday night with a bottle of wine and her usual jokes about our town's quietest celebrity. But now sometimes the jokes came with stories, real ones, about people who had been helped because of what Grace started. Veterans came by the bakery, strangers from nearby towns. One woman hugged Grace tightly, tearful, and whispered, "You reminded my son he still mattered," then left before Grace could even ask her name. At the farmer's market, Grace set out a small hand-carved sign beside a basket of produce. Free produce for any veteran. No questions. No limits. And just below that, in smaller letters, "If you've served, let the earth serve you now." Some took potatoes, some took nothing. One young man stood at the edge of her stall for 15 minutes, then simply whispered, "Thank you," and walked away, empty-handed, but not empty. Logan visited only a few times, but never alone. Each time he brought someone new, a quiet man who rebuilt the fence, a wiry woman who rewired the coop, another who fixed the loose latch on her front gate like it was part of national defense. They stayed just long enough to help, then disappeared. No fanfare, no debt, no words needed. One of them, Reggie, came back a week after the lien had been cleared, and without asking, installed solar panels on her roof. "I didn't ask for these," Grace said, watching him from the porch. Reggie just nodded once. "Logan said sunlight helps things grow." One golden evening, she stood with her arms folded, watching Mia run barefoot through the yard, laughing, unburdened. And Grace understood. This was what it meant to keep something, to earn it, not through might, not through speech, but through quiet resilience. And now, she had a new purpose, to keep showing up, to be the woman who didn't look away, so others could begin to see themselves again. That winter came early. One evening, as Grace was locking up the bakery, a car pulled slowly into the gravel lot. She thought it might be a lost traveler. But when the door opened, a young man stepped out, barely 20, face pale with a kind of tightness around the eyes that she recognized all too well. He approached slowly, hesitating with every step. "Are you?" He paused, swallowed. "The woman who helped Logan Wells?" Grace blinked. "I was one of them." The young man nodded, reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "I'm his cousin. We hadn't talked in years, but he sent this to our family. Asked me to bring it to you." She took it carefully. "Thank you," she said. He didn't stay, just turned, climbed back into the car, and drove off into the frost-tipped dusk. Back home, Grace sat by the window and opened the envelope under the soft glow of her reading lamp. The handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, slanted slightly to the right. "Grace, I always believed the battlefield defined us, that only in war do we learn who we are. But I was wrong. Kindness does the same thing. It reveals us, sharpens us, softens the places war left ragged. You didn't just give me a ride, you gave me permission to live again. And through that, you gave something to everyone I've touched since. The road you opened in me, I'll never stop walking. Thank you for seeing me when I was disappearing. See her, Logan." Grace folded the letter with shaking hands, rose quietly, and walked to the fireplace. She opened the small wooden box where it had all begun. The purple heart. The challenge coin. The note about quiet places and unseen growth. And now, Logan's final letter. She placed it on top, closed the lid gently. Not a shrine, a promise. In the spring, she added a new sign to the edge of the garden. Hand-painted, faded slightly by dew and sun. Free produce for any veteran. No questions, no limits. And just beneath, in smaller words, what you grow in quiet places will one day feed someone you'll never meet. And they came. Not always for the tomatoes, not always for the food, but for the look in her eyes that said, I see you. For the warmth of being remembered, without having to explain. On her birthday, a package arrived. No return address, no note. Inside was a framed photograph. Logan, standing at a podium in Washington, hand over his heart. Behind him, projected onto a massive screen, the words, she didn't ask, she just acted. And beneath it, her name, Grace Bennett. She hung it beside the pantry, right where she packed meals every night. Because some things don't need to be honored in marble. They live in the hands that keep giving.